Hey everyone, buckle up. We're diving into the thrilling world of economics where the stakes are high, the jargon is baffling, and the jokes are, well, let's just say I'm trying my best. Today's main event, left-wing versus right-wing economics, dawn of the fiscal freaks. It's like Alien versus Predator, but instead of slimy aliens and dreadlocked hunters, we have tax cuts and social programs. Now before you click away faster than a politician dodges a tough question, I promise to make this as painless and maybe even slightly enjoyable as possible. We'll be your guide through this confusing landscape using real-world examples, mind-blowing statistics, okay, maybe just regular statistics, and enough humor to keep you awake. Because let's face it, economics can be drier than a popcorn fart in a sandstorm. This isn't just about boring numbers and graphs, though. It's about understanding the different approaches governments take to manage their economies and how those choices impact people like you and me. So grab your thinking caps, or your favorite comfy blanket, and get ready to explore the wild world of left-wing and right-wing economics. Let's start with the lefties, shall we? No, not the ones who can't throw a baseball straight. We're talking about left-wing economics. Imagine a world where the government ensures everyone gets a fair shot. Left-wing economics uses government power to promote equality and social welfare. Think universal healthcare, free education, and strong social safety nets. By taxing the wealthy and redistributing wealth, we can create a fairer society. It's about a basic standard of living for everyone. Now let's hop over to the other side of the ring, where the right-wingers hang out. Picture a world where the government is like a hands-off referee, letting individuals and businesses duke it out in the free market. That's the gist of right-wing economics. Right-wing economics, often associated with capitalism or free market economics, emphasizes individual freedom, limited government intervention, and the power of the market to allocate resources efficiently. In this system, businesses are encouraged to thrive, competition is king, and success is seen as a reward for hard work and innovation. Think of it like a giant game of Monopoly, where the person with the most money and property wins. It's a bit ruthless, sure, but supporters argue that this cutthroat competition ultimately leads to innovation, economic growth, and a better life for everyone. They believe that lower taxes, deregulation, and free trade will unleash the entrepreneurial spirit and create a more prosperous society. Of course, critics argue that this system can lead to inequality, as those who start with more advantages are likely to do better, while others might get left behind. Let's take a trip to the 1980s, a time of big hair, shoulder pads, and Ronald Reagan. Reagan ushered in an era of right-wing economic policies. His trickle-down economics aimed to cut taxes for the wealthy to stimulate growth. The idea was that these tax breaks would create jobs and benefit everyone. The reality, however, is more complicated. Economic expansion came with increased income inequality. The gap between the rich and the poor widened. Fast forward a couple of decades and we find ourselves in the midst of the 2008 financial crisis, a global economic meltdown that nearly brought the entire system crashing down. Remember those images of panicked bankers, plummeting stock prices, and people losing their homes? Yeah, good times. Now, while the causes of the crisis are complex, one contributing factor was deregulation, a key tenet of right-wing economics. For years, the financial industry had enjoyed looser regulations, allowing them to engage in riskier behavior, like subprime mortgages and complex financial instruments that even they didn't fully understand. Think of it like letting a bunch of teenagers loose in a candy store with unlimited credit cards. Sure, they might have a blast in the short term, but eventually someone's going to end up with a stomachache and the whole place might just explode with sugar. The 2008 crisis showed that while deregulation can lead to innovation and economic growth, it can also create an environment where reckless behavior goes unchecked, ultimately putting the entire system at risk. One of the most enduring debates in economics is the relationship between tax cuts and economic growth. Right-wing economists argue that lower taxes, especially for businesses and high earners, act like a shot of adrenaline to the economy, boosting investment, job creation, and overall prosperity. It's like taking the governor off a race car, they say. Less government interference means more speed and economic dynamism. They point to historical examples like the Reagan tax cuts as evidence that this approach works. Left-wing economists, however, view this argument with a healthy dose of skepticism. They contend that while tax cuts might provide a short-term sugar rush to the economy, they often lead to higher deficits, reduced government revenue, and cuts to essential social programs in the long run. They argue that investing in education, infrastructure, and social safety nets is a much more sustainable way to promote long-term economic growth and benefit a wider segment of the population. It's like investing in a good pair of running shoes, they say. It might cost more upfront, but it will pay off in the long run with better performance and fewer injuries. Now here's the thing about economic policies: they don't exist in a vacuum. They have real-world consequences impacting people's lives in profound ways. One of the most significant impacts of right-wing economic policies, particularly those focused on tax cuts and deregulation, has been the widening gap between the rich and the poor. While proponents argue that these policies benefit everyone by creating a more prosperous society overall, critics point out that the gains are often concentrated at the top, while those at the bottom struggle to keep up. Imagine a game of Monopoly where one player starts with all the properties and hotels, while the others are stuck with Baltic and Mediterranean avenues. Sure, the game might technically be fair, but it's pretty clear who's going to come out on top. This growing inequality has far-reaching consequences, not just for individuals but for society as a whole. It can lead to social unrest, political instability, and a decline in overall well-being. So, while right-wing economic policies might sound good in theory, it's crucial to consider their impact on all members of society, not just those at the top of the economic food chain. Alright folks, let's hop across the pond to Scandinavia, a region often held up as a shining example of left-wing economics in action. Think cozy sweaters, minimalist furniture, and a government that's more involved in your life than your mother-in-law after 3 glasses of wine. Now before you pack your bags and brush up on your Swedish, remember that even utopia has its quirks. The Scandinavian model, often described as social democracy, is based on a mix of free market capitalism and robust social welfare programs. They've got universal healthcare, free education from preschool to university, generous parental leave policies, and a strong safety net for the unemployed. It's like a giant comfy blanket for their citizens, paid for with some of the highest taxes in the world. So, is this socialist paradise all it's cracked up to be? Well, it depends who you ask. Scandinavians enjoy a high standard of living, low crime rates, and a strong sense of social cohesion. But critics argue that their high taxes stifle innovation and entrepreneurship. Plus, let's be real, those long dark winters can't be good for anyone's mood, even with free healthcare. Universal healthcare, a topic that gets people more riled up than a squirrel in a peanut factory. It's a cornerstone of many left-wing economic systems, the idea that everyone deserves access to quality healthcare, regardless of their ability to pay. Proponents argue that it's a moral imperative, ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to live a healthy life. They point to countries like Canada and most of Europe, where universal healthcare is the norm, and people don't go bankrupt from medical bills. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, hold your horses. Critics argue that government-run healthcare is inefficient, plagued by long wait times and limited choices. They fear that it would lead to rationing of care, with government bureaucrats deciding who gets what treatment. They also worry about the cost, arguing that it would lead to sky-high taxes and bankrupt the country. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, kind of like trying to assemble IKEA furniture after a bottle of wine. Next up, let's talk about the minimum wage, that magical number that determines how much money you get paid for flipping burgers, folding clothes, or any other entry-level job that keeps the economy humming along. Left-leaning folks argue that a higher minimum wage is essential for lifting people out of poverty and reducing income inequality. They say that no one who works full-time should have to live below the poverty line, struggling to afford basic necessities. They argue that a higher minimum wage boosts the economy by putting more money in the pockets of low-wage workers, who then spend it in their communities. It's a win-win, right? Well, not so fast, say the critics. They warn that raising the minimum wage too high will force businesses to raise prices, leading to inflation that hurts everyone. They also worry that it will lead to job losses, as businesses automate tasks or reduce their workforce to offset the higher labor costs. It's a delicate balancing act, trying to find that sweet spot where workers earn a living wage without causing economic chaos. Section 4. Education, investing in the future or bankrupting the present. Last but not least, let's talk about education, the key to unlocking human potential, or at least that's what they tell us. Left-leaning folks believe that education should be a right, not a privilege, and they advocate for increased government funding for schools, particularly in disadvantaged communities. They argue that investing in education is investing in the future, creating a more skilled workforce and a fairer society. They point to countries like Finland with its highly regarded education system and emphasis on early childhood education as a model to emulate. However, critics argue that simply throwing money at the problem won't solve it. They point to bureaucratic inefficiencies, bloated administrations, and a lack of accountability in the education system. They also worry about the cost of free college tuition, arguing that it would saddle students with massive debt and wouldn't necessarily lead to better job prospects. It's a complex issue, kind of like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while riding a unicycle. Okay folks, it's time to break out the spreadsheets and calculators because things are about to get real. Numbery. We've explored the philosophies and policies of both left and right-wing economics. Now let's see how they stack up in the real world, using everyone's favorite thing, cold hard data. But before we dive into this statistical showdown, a word of caution. Economics is not an exact science. It's more like interpretive dance, open to interpretation, influenced by context, and prone to the occasional wardrobe malfunction. So while we'll be looking at indicators like GDP growth, income inequality, and social mobility, remember that these numbers only tell part of the story. They don't capture the human impact of these policies, the hopes and dreams, the struggles and triumphs of everyday people trying to make ends meet. But hey, at least it's not another cat video, right? Let's start with the big kahuna of economic indicators, gross domestic product, or GDP. It's the total value of goods and services produced in a country, kind of like the economic report card for nations around the world. Right-leaning folks tend to argue that their policies, focused on free markets and limited government intervention, lead to higher GDP growth. They point to the roaring economies of the 1980s under Reagan or the tech boom of the 1990s as evidence. Left-leaning folks, however, counter that GDP growth doesn't tell the whole story. They argue that it's possible to have a growing economy where the benefits are concentrated at the top, while the middle class shrinks and poverty persists. They prefer to look at indicators like median income growth, poverty rates, and social mobility to get a more complete picture of how the economy is impacting people's lives. It's like arguing over the best flavor of ice cream. Everyone has their preference, and there's no right or wrong answer, except for mint chocolate chip, which is objectively the best. Section 3. The happiness factor. Can money buy contentment? Now let's get philosophical for a moment, shall we? Is economic growth the be-all and end-all of a successful society? Or are there other factors like happiness, well-being, and social cohesion that are just as important? Some studies suggest that beyond a certain level of income, more money doesn't necessarily lead to more happiness. Scandinavian countries with their high taxes and generous social safety nets consistently rank among the happiest in the world, despite having lower GDP growth rates than some other developed nations. This suggests that factors like income equality, social support, and a sense of community might play a significant role in overall well-being. Of course, others argue that happiness is subjective and difficult to measure. They point out that economic freedom and the opportunity to pursue one's own goals are also essential for a fulfilling life. It's like trying to define the meaning of life. Everyone has their own interpretation, and good luck getting everyone to agree on one definition. Section 4. The Great Debate. Which side is right or left? So, after all this, where do we stand? Which economic system reigns supreme? Well, the answer, my friends, is it's complicated. As much as we love a clear winner, the reality is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the complexities of managing an economy. Both left and right-wing economics have their strengths and weaknesses, their successes and failures. It's about finding the right balance, the sweet spot between economic growth and social equity, between individual freedom and collective responsibility. It's about recognizing that the economy is not a zero-sum game, where one side's gain is inevitably the other side's loss. It's about creating a system that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. Easier said than done, right? It's like trying to herd cats, messy, unpredictable, and likely to end with you covered in scratches. But hey, if it were easy, everyone would be an economist, and then who would write the witty commentary? Section 5. Stay tuned, folks. And there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour of left and right-wing economics. We've crunched the numbers, explored the philosophies, and hopefully injected a little humor along the way. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, my friends. There's so much more to explore, from the role of government regulation to the impact of globalization, from the challenges of climate change to the rise of automation. But we'll save those thrilling topics for another time. For now, let's take a break, grab a snack, and ponder the economic mysteries of the universe. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Okay folks, take a deep breath and put down the pitchforks, metaphorically speaking of course. We've spent the last few sections painting left and right-wing economics as two opposing forces battling for economic supremacy. But let's be real, the world is rarely that black and white. It's more like a Jackson Pollock painting, messy, abstract, and open to interpretation. We love to put things into neat little boxes, don't we? Left versus right, liberal versus conservative, cats versus dogs. Spoiler alert, dogs are better. It makes the world seem simpler, easier to understand. But the truth is, most of us fall somewhere in the messy middle, a confusing kaleidoscope of beliefs and values. And economics is no different. The idea of pure, unadulterated capitalism or socialism is about as realistic as a unicorn riding a roller coaster while juggling chainsaws. Sure, it's fun to imagine, but it's not going to happen in the real world. Section 2, the mixed economy, a bit of this, a bit of that. So, if the extremes are a myth, what's the alternative? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because we're about to enter the thrilling world of the mixed economy. Don't worry, it's not as boring as it sounds. Think of it like your favorite cocktail, a carefully crafted blend of different ingredients that, when combined just right, create something truly special. Most modern economies are a mix of free market principles and government intervention. They embrace the power of the market to drive innovation and create wealth, but recognize the need for government to provide a safety net, regulate industries, and promote social welfare. It's like baking a cake, really. You need the right balance of ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs, a dash of economic theory to create something delicious. Too much flour, and you get a dry, crumbly mess. Too much government intervention, and you stifle innovation and economic growth. It's all about finding that sweet spot, the perfect recipe for a thriving society. The key to a successful mixed economy is pragmatism, not ideology. It's about being willing to adapt to changing circumstances, to experiment with different approaches, and to put aside partisan bickering in favor of solutions that work. It's like navigating a ship through stormy seas. You need a skilled captain who can adjust the sails, steer around obstacles, and keep the ship afloat, even when the waves are crashing down. Clinging rigidly to one ideology, whether it's the free market or government intervention, is like refusing to change course, even when you're headed straight for the rocks. It's time to move beyond the tired old debates of left versus right and embrace a more nuanced, pragmatic approach to economics. It's time to stop treating economic policy like a religion and start treating it like economics, a complex, ever-evolving field that requires careful analysis, critical thinking, and a healthy dose of humility. Section 4, the future of economics, challenges and opportunities. As we look to the future, the global economy faces a host of challenges, from climate change and resource scarcity to technological disruption and rising inequality. These challenges are complex, interconnected, and require innovative solutions that transcend traditional ideological divides. This is not a time for ideological purity or partisan gridlock. It's a time for collaboration, creativity, and a willingness to challenge outdated assumptions. It's a time to harness the power of both the market and the government to create a more sustainable, equitable, and prosperous future for all. So let's raise a glass of responsibly sourced fair trade coffee, of course, to the messy, exhilarating, and endlessly fascinating world of economics. It's a field full of contradictions, complexities, and the occasional bout of existential dread. But hey, at least it's never boring. Section 1, the power of perspective. It's your economy too. So there you have it, folks, a crash course in left versus right economics, served with a side of humor and a sprinkle of existential dread. We've explored the philosophies, crunched the numbers, sort of, and hopefully left you with more questions than answers. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? Economics isn't just abstract, it's about real people's lives. It's about real people's lives. It's about whether that single mom working 2 jobs can afford to put food on the table and keep a roof over her head. It's about whether that college graduate drowning in student loan debt can ever afford to buy a house or start a family. It's about whether future generations will inherit a planet ravaged by climate change or a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. In other words, it's about you. Yes, You, the person watching this video in your pajamas, probably eating cereal at an unreasonable hour, you have a stake in this game whether you realize it or not. Your vote, your voice, your choices as a consumer, they all matter. Section 2. Stay curious, stay engaged, and don't forget to laugh. So, what have we learned today? Hopefully that economics doesn't have to be as dry and intimidating as a week-old bagel. It can be funny, engaging, and even a little bit mind-blowing. But more importantly, I hope you've learned that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the economic challenges we face. The left versus right debate is a useful starting point, but it's just that, a starting point. The real work happens when we move beyond the tired old talking points and engage in thoughtful, nuanced conversations about how to create an economy that works for everyone. So, stay curious, folks. Read books, watch documentaries, especially this one, and engage in respectful debates with your friends and family. And most importantly, don't forget to laugh along the way. Because if we can't find a little humor in the absurdity of it all, then what's the point? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a sudden urge to go hug an economist. Don't worry, I'll wear gloves.